thanks for tuning into the channel again. I'm Dr. Duck. As always, I have moved out of my medical profession to play the part of a media analyst, and in the ever-changing scope of entertainment industry, I think that it is good enough time as any to bring on an interview with a very important, very prestigious guest who can accurately judge the current state of Star Wars and what is peak Star Wars and what is mid Star Wars and what is bad Star Wars, as that is the ever most pressing topic in our culture today. I'm going to go over to my associate who's going to interview this person, Dr. Duck. Thank you, Dr. Duck. I'm Dr. Duck. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce a very prestigious guest, Professor Exer. Come hither, Professor Exer. Yes, this person is a very prestigious guest. They went to the Harvard School of Star Wars, and I think that they are a very good person in terms of judging the current state of that media. How are you today, Professor Exer?
I'm feeling all right.
Thank you, Professor
But
Exer.
I felt a slight disturbance in the force this morning.
Oh.
So please bear with me as
yes.
I work through this difficult time.
Yes, Professor Exer is a very, very prophetic person who talks about midichlorians and the various force streams we might all get. I'm sure that some of you might have had some this morning. Professor Exer, I do have some questions for you here. What is your background? Would you explain to the audience your background in the academic educational field of Star Wars?
Well, I started as a young tyke. I first saw Star Wars.
You were a youngling.
I was a youngling, indeed. And I first saw Star Wars on the screen. I was in the Jedi archives, and I was first being exposed to this. You see, I'm good friends with Luke Skywalker, and he showed me his history, his great, grand, and extensive history.
Would you say that was your most meaningful experience with a celebrity?
Perhaps. It's up there with Chancellor Palpatine. You know, I had the opportunity to meet him shortly before his demise.
Oh yes, very tragic.
Well, maybe not.
Maybe not so tragic.
Not soon enough in Star Wars.
Yes. I think we should move on from this question. And
yes,
did you receive your diploma?
I did.
Well, Professor Exer, I think that it's time to move on to some pressing questions that I think our audience might have, such as, what are your thoughts on the current state of Star Wars?
Well, you see, the thing is, there are these myths that have come out since the original and mythological tales of Star Wars. You see, there are these 3 movies that occurred depicting what some have said are the true and accurate historical events post what occurred with the demise of the Emperor.
Are you disputing the canon now?
I am disputing the canon, because the true canon was what we refer to as the expanded universe, and those were a collection of books, of literary works that occurred between 1982 and I believe 2015. And the reason that they stopped is because of the acquisition of Star Wars by Disney. And Star Wars had a history that occurred after the original 3 Star Wars movies. That what happened there, and just to give a brief overview, is Han and Leia indeed do get married, but they have 3 children. Their oldest kids are twins, only in this case the girl is older than the boy, and then they have a 3rd child who they name after Leia's father, Anakin Skywalker. And then, of course, you look at Luke's life and what happened there in the expanded universe there, and let me check my notes. Yes, he marries the Emperor's hand named Mara Jade, and she was brought in to work for the Emperor, I think as young as 12 years old. She was very, very young, and he basically groomed her and brought her up nearly as his daughter. And she ended up obviously losing the Emperor and losing her tie to the Empire. As a result of that, makes it her mission in life. After the Emperor is killed, she learns that it was because of Luke Skywalker. She believes he killed the Emperor. And her goal is to kill Luke Skywalker. Well, fast forward 5 years, and she ends up meeting Luke, and she ends up discovering that actually Luke didn't kill the Emperor. It was Darth Vader who killed the Emperor. And through a series of events, coming to know Luke and learning about the Force in a more positive light than what she had previously known, she ends up forgiving Luke and accepting his father's lightsaber. becoming essentially a Padawan at that point. And then through a series of other events, Luke actually has his brush with the dark side in the dark, I believe it's the Dark Empire trilogy. I'll have to double check on that, but he actually is seduced by the dark side in what he believes is the Emperor coming back from the dead, trying to pull him back to the dark side, and he has to overcome that, but he ends up losing many of his Padawans who fall away because they believe that Luke has become the very thing that he sought to destroy.
And I need to cut you off for a minute there.
Go ahead.
Would you say all of this that you're describing here, would you say that it is peak Star Wars?
Well, it's getting to peak Star Wars because there's even more stories beyond all of this. This is all there. I would suggest that there are 4 major sub-franchises within the Star Wars universe. There's the prequel trilogy that we all know, and it has its issues, of course, but we can get into that. But then there's the sequel trilogy, which is the classics, the thing that started Star Wars off. And then there is the segment of Star Wars that deals with the aftermath of Luke, Leia, and Han Solo, and what happens to them, and who they get married to, how many children they end up having, and so on and so forth. And then the 4th segment, I would say, is what happens to all of their posterity. Han and Leia have 3 children. Luke ends up marrying Mara Jade, and they have a son named Ben Skywalker. You'll note the differences now. You'll note the differences on page 45 of my notes. You'll note the differences between what they call the sequel trilogy and what was in the expanded universe to explain what happens. They took things out of the expanded universe and they distorted them and turned them into what you see in the sequel trilogy, which I think is a very poor representation of what happens.
You would say that that is bad Star Wars content?
Yes, I would say it's bad Star Wars content, and it has no business being considered Star Wars. And unfortunately, it has spawned all kinds of other not what I would consider to be not canon Star Wars events. For example, throughout the story of Mara Jade that I was referring to, that is peak Thrawn era. That is what is known as the Thrawn trilogy, that 3-parter in which Mara Jade goes through her arc that is referred to as the Thrawn trilogy because he is the big bad in that trilogy.
That's some interesting segue there,
Yes,
because
yes.
did you know that Grand Admiral Thrawn is in fact appearing currently in the Star Wars Disney show Ahsoka?
I would like to debunk all of this. That is not Grand Admiral Thrawn. That is a man wearing blue paint who needs to go on a little bit of a diet. Let me explain. Grand Admiral Thrawn is a Chiss. That is a certain breed of alien. And one of the big themes overarching the expanded universe is the fact that Emperor Palpatine was a racist, which I'm very surprised that no one seems to have picked up on in Star Wars lore and run with, since that is a very popular story plot these days. However, Palpatine hates aliens. That is why the Wookiees specifically, and very particularly, were abused in the Empire. That is why it was, of course, a shock when they go to the Death Star and they say,
"Where are you taking this thing?"
Grand Admiral Thrawn needed to look like an alien, not like a human wearing face paint. And that is what he looks like. A fat, slumped over human wearing blue face paint. That is not Grand Admiral Thrawn.
I know emotions are running high right now, but
Indeed.
so is that a very big part of Admiral Thrawn's character in the books, that the Emperor would perceive him in a negative light because of his status as an alien?
Yes, this is why he survived the downfall of the Empire for so long, and he ended up becoming the new face of the Empire because everybody else was wiped out, and he was given the outermost outpost, if you will, he was the only non-human Grand Moff, as it were, and he was not in the Emperor's inner circle, shall we say, and so he was the last man standing, as it were, and so that is why he ends up inheriting the Empire in the book Heir to the Empire.
That sounds like there's a lot of different facets of that story in terms of the characterization and even the themes of it, and you just aren't... let me get this straight, though, Professor Exer. You've seen what Grand Admiral Thrawn looks like in Ahsoka. Have you watched any, if at all, of Ahsoka?
I have not watched any of that drivel. I have given up on Disney as a whole, to be quite frank. I have stopped watching anything that they have produced for Disney Plus. There is a brief part of me in the back of my head that saw Loki season 2 and thought, well, could I give it another chance? I'm not going to give it another chance. But in reference to Star Wars, the problem is not, some of the content may be fine. Some of the content may be okay. I stopped watching it, however, because what I've seen is it's basically regurgitation. It's taking all the old things that we used to like and turning them into this new art form. But they're not generating new stories. They're not generating anything new. They're just using Star Wars as the umbrella term and then creating these unrelated stories that don't necessarily fit with the previous existing material. And by telling you so much of the expanded universe story, it is to give you the understanding that, contrary to Kathleen Kennedy's belief that there was no source material for her to choose from, on the contrary, there is a plethora of source material to choose from. There is so much that could have been done that is so much better and would have sold much more and probably made them more money and would have kept people happy about Star Wars. Now let me just make a point about the prequel trilogy, because yes, I just recently watched Attack of the Clones for the first time in many years, and the first half of it is quite frankly unforgivable. The dialogue is some of the worst dialogue in cinematic history, and there is no getting around that. However, by the end of the movie, getting to see all the Jedi and good versus evil, democracy versus tyranny, all of this stuff, the good messaging overall, and the good guys fighting the bad guys and all of that, it made me happy at the end of it.
Professor Exer was happy.
Professor Exer was happy for the first time in my life. And let me just say this.
The first time was when you met Luke Skywalker,
Exactly. Yes. That was one of the top moments with a celebrity, yes.
Top 10 of all time.
Top 10 of all time. So my point, though, is Star Wars used to make people happy, but because of these sequel trilogies that completely undermined everything that everyone liked about Star Wars and made it a divisive franchise rather than something that brought everybody together, it just completely ruined it. And it didn't have to be this way, is what I'm saying. All of these other offshoots, and this is why I don't watch them anymore, all these other offshoots were spawned from this bad-intentioned take on a most beloved franchise. No one could have said that anybody could have destroyed Star Wars. There was nothing that could destroy Star Wars.
Absolutely.
But yet here we are. Star Wars is destroyed, and we are just watching the dregs eke out of the bathtub of leftover bathwater, shall we say?
Let us have, I think that it's time, let us have 5 seconds of silence for Star Wars.
That's enough.
Okay, I do have a couple more questions for you. So IGN came out with an article that said that Star Wars has become essentially somebody doing an unboxing video of a new toy every week, because that's essentially what they're doing. A couple weeks ago, we got Hayden Christensen coming back again in a deep-faked CGI digitally de-aged. And I have nothing against Hayden Christensen. I did hear one critic say that they needed to bring him back because they needed somebody who is an expert in delivering bad dialogue. We won't get into that respect to Hayden Christensen. That was just a little in good faith jab. Sorry. Anyway, but I have some questions for you. So you don't think that deep faking old actors, digitally de-aging them and bringing them back, you don't think that could bring you back to Star Wars?
Not at all. And here's the issue. I get very, very tired of, again, this regurgitation of things that we've already seen, beloved characters that I don't want touched anymore. Please stop touching my characters. Please stop messing with them. They were good the way they were. Let me make this point. If Disney wanted to do things right, Disney would do an animated series, perhaps even in the style of the What If series. And by style, I'm referring to the specific illustration and animation style. I thought that was a really excellent way of doing an animated series. I would love to see that done for Star Wars. I would go and take all of those expanded universe stories, the ones specifically that deal with the characters that are either deceased in real life or are just too old to play the characters anymore. You can either get voice actors that sound very similar to the original cast, or you can use the modern technology to attempt to get it even closer to their original voices. But I would love to see an animated series going through the expanded universe, and then you can pick up in the fourth iteration of Star Wars. We'll refer to them as iterations. The fourth iteration of Star Wars that I didn't get to earlier on revolves around Han and Leia's 3 children and Luke's son. And these are very important stories because what happens is Jaina goes on to be a great Jedi, and Jason falls to the dark side and restarts the Empire, and he's the one, I believe, that has Star Killer Base and all of that. You can see how they tried in the sequel trilogy to pull some of that in to their plots, and they made an effort, but they completely changed the story because the big deal about all of this is Jason goes on such a rabid rage. He kills Mara Jade, Luke Skywalker's wife, his aunt. And then in the final set of books that deals with the Solo and Skywalker children and grandchildren is Jaina has to avenge her master and put a stop to this resurgence of the evil empire, and she must kill her twin brother. And I'm blanking on the name of that book. It's a really cool cover art. I'll just tell you that. You guys can look it up.
I think that we've kind of covered all of my questions in the midst of all of this, going through it all. But could you mention, you've talked a lot about the storylines and the better things that they did, but could you please speak to the audience some specific book recommendations for them to look up?
First of all, start with Heir to the Empire, the Thrawn trilogy. Those deal with Thrawn, the actual character of Thrawn. The racism discussion is touched on a bit in there. There's also some discussion on dealing with clones, because there's actually a racism inside of the rebellion, now the New Republic, where they can't handle having clones around. There's actually discussion of that in that trilogy, and in the aftermath, the Thrawn duology that takes place 10 years after that. I would start with at least with the Thrawn trilogy, and then I also really recommend the book Truce at Bakura, or Bakura. I'm not sure. There seems to be multiple pronunciations, but that takes place roughly 24 hours after Return of the Jedi, and kind of deals with even things like Luke having physical ailments because of the electricity that he received from the Emperor. Just little things like that, little loose ends to be tied up and stuff like that.
It seems like it was written by people who are actually interested in these kinds of consistencies.
Exactly, and that's my final point on Disney Star Wars is there is no interest in consistency. It's all about making this fan fiction that doesn't actually fit within the main universe.
And that doesn't actually have a story.
And that doesn't have a story. A lot of people keep complaining that, oh yeah, we have episode after episode that doesn't get us anywhere. Well, that's what you get when you have people that are just not interested in making quality entertainment anymore. They're interested in selling toys, selling products, selling name recognition and brand recognition, but they're not selling stories anymore.
And I do have 2 more questions for you. A fan asked Dave Filoni, who is right now by all intents and purposes running Star Wars, they asked him if he would do Mara Jade, and he didn't have a solid answer on that. But what would your reaction be if Dave Filoni all of a sudden took Mara Jade and tried to adapt her?
It hurts my soul to think about questions like that, to be honest. I may actually take the time to watch just to see what they do to one of my most beloved characters, to be honest. But I would be watching in the most somber state of grief.
Okay, and I have just one more question before we close, but it's a very important question, and it absolutely has to do with Star Wars. But would you have any dating advice you could give to the audience now?
Don't do it.
Thank you, Professor Exer, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for listening to the abysmal state of Star Wars, and we will see you guys next time.